Thanks, Daniel and Kate. That was so good. I'm so jazzed. All right. If I could send you all a soft pretzel right now, I would. So a lot of people put questions into the chat, so I figured we could just go through those, and I'll, I guess, pose them to Daniel and Kate. So what can you talk about the cost of the Green New Deal and how it would create jobs and the broader implications this has for immigration and how it could be implemented locally?
Sorry, did you say the cost of the Green New Deal?
Yes, yes.
To quote my friend Bernard, what price is too high to save the planet? The Bernie campaign proposed $16 trillion spending over 10 years. That would be roughly doubling the military budget every year, 10 years in a row. That's a lot of money. At the same time, if we look at like what Kate was talking about, you know, $1, $2, $3 trillion stimulus, I don't think that's too much money. I think part of what we're talking about, and I'll let you jump in, Kate, is like everything green is not new and doesn't exist before. It's taking things we spent money on in a bad way and now making it green. Like the US spends tens of billions of dollars on things like highway construction that could be spent instead on fixing the potholes. My God. But also on, you know, electric buses, light rail, dedicated bus lanes, electrification of public transportation infrastructure, massive increase in frequency, many more union jobs driving these buses, and electric bus manufacturer in the US, which is also going to cost some money. So I think that part of what we're talking about is not just one whole new addition, but we're also talking about unbuilding the fossil fuel economy. So to some extent, it's also a shift, but we're not going to plan on the private sector doing that just because we slapped a 5%, a 5 cent or 20 cent or even 50 cent carbon tax. But it's an increase in public investment and a shift to public investment, and to essentially mobilize every single dime that we can squeeze out of the computers at the Federal Reserve.
Yeah, I would agree with all of that. I think one thing that's helpful in thinking about this whole question is to think of the Green New Deal less either certainly as a bill, you know, something that we're going to pass through some big omnibus package, or even a set of bills or a set of investments, you know, whatever it is. I think, you know, the New Deal is not was not a perfect blueprint, right, for what we're trying to do, certainly. But I think what's instructive about it in thinking about a Green New Deal is that this was a style of governance, right? This was not a set of programs. This was an ethic. This was a new social contract for what the balance is between the public and the private sector, what it is the government owes to its people, and how it is that we all interact with each other, and what it is that society values, right? And that was the basis on which it proceeded. And I think, you know, in that context, there's almost nothing that doesn't fall under that, and that is right when we're thinking about the climate crisis, right? There is no policy field in the next, you know, ever potentially, right, over the next decade and through the end of the century, for, you know, the foreseeable future, we will need to live in a zero carbon world if we're going to avert the sort of, you know, worst case scenario. And so rather than, I think, thinking about the Green New Deal as, you know, we need public transit, we need public housing, we need to nationalize the fossil fuel industry. What does it look like to really apply this to our idea of, you know, what it is a government does, right? Like, how do we think about what, you know, the very mission of what an economy is, and, you know, what kinds of goals we need to be chasing. The main goal of our economy for the last several decades, and really not that much longer before that, was to grow GDP indefinitely, right? And we know that that is not a terribly good way even to make people happy. It's not a good way to, you know, distribute society's vast resources equitably. And we can, you know, place more sort of value claims on what it is that we want to be investing in. And I think that is, you know, to a certain extent already done. I mean, I mentioned the fossil fuel industry and that there's many, many ways in which the government already provides ample support to certain sectors of industry, sort of without saying that this is industrial policy, without saying that this is planning, but that's exactly what it is, right? When we hand over $26 billion a year to the fossil fuel industry, that is state support, right? That is planning. It's just planning in the wrong direction. And so I think, when you think about cost in that context, it's not really, I think it's not so easily deracinated, right? The cost is just, what is the government doing? And the government is, as we would hope and as we lay out in the book, is working toward a low carbon world and trying to build safety and prosperity for all. And so I think, immigration is obviously a huge part of what the sort of next century is going to look like. We know that climate change is already displacing people from the global south and bringing them north. We know that there will be huge internal migrations within countries. And so if we think about the Green New Deal as this much broader framework, the question isn't what is our border policy? The question is, what do we owe to fellow human beings, right? And what kind of, do we want to be a welcoming country? Do we want to be a country that, is not sort of operating on the basis of scarcity and that we, only have so many resources we can distribute? Or do we know, as I think is sort of inherent in most Green New Deal proposals, that we actually have a lot, right? We have a lot to work with, and that there's no sort of shortage to go around for, just all of what we can share, and we can make the table longer, not close the kitchen, right? So I think that's how I would think about it, is just to really broaden kind of what it is the Green New Deal is doing, and that's the New Deal famously sort of created the New Deal order, and so I think the Green New Deal order will be the sort of style of governing that is just as expansive, if not more.
Let me just jump on really quickly. I totally agree with that, although I just want to state for the record, I spent a long time finding an expandable table, and I hardly ever expand it. It's such a pain in the ass. But budgetarily, we can do it. I think I think, frankly speaking, like Pennsylvania is not a fabulously wealthy state. Philly is not a hugely wealthy city. And I think that means that to a large extent, we have to fight for access to federal funds. And that also means that now, with the possibility of a stimulus, I would really urge all of us in Philly to try to get unfundable plans on the table for the city and the state, so that we have like shovel-ready projects ready when the federal stimulus comes. Because otherwise, they'll say, who's got a project? And California and New York will have projects because they can fund them, and we won't. So I think we have to not shy away from literally preparing projects that we can't afford, in the expectation that there's going to be money from Department of Housing, HUD, Department of Transportation, you name it. The other thing though is we have to fight to increase tax revenue in locally. And there are challenges in PA with the state constitution, the Commonwealth Constitution, that other people on this call probably know more about the exact details than I do. But there are things that we can do, push for, to get more progressive taxation. I think anybody in Philadelphia and Philly, you just have to go to Bryn Mawr. Like if you could put an ice cream scoop into those mansions, you could fund a lot of things that we need in Philly. So we need strategies to, federally speaking, the federal government can authorize funding in a way that is not tied to tax revenue, but locally that's not exactly the case. And so I think we should, in Red Vienna, which has the most successful public housing program in the world, and now a third of the housing is public and a third is cooperative. In Red Vienna, the finance minister of Red Vienna in the 1920s was known as the tax sadist, because 40% of the property tax came from the 0.5% richest properties. So I think we do need to find ways to make the wealthy in the state pay their fair share, and that will be an important part locally. But that is not, that is one piece, and then the other piece is getting ready for more federal money, and we have to fight for it. We just have to fight for it. And that's one of the reasons why we have to leave the city and organize all throughout rural Pennsylvania, is because we need to make the federal investment happen.